So, first of all, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yep. Well, my name's John Pryor. I'm probably known to most people I work with as JP. I'm 53 now, so I've been in industry a long time. Got my first job in the academy system in about 1996. About 4 years in the academy system, working with quite a lot of sports. After that, I moved into rugby as a strength conditioning and head of performance for rugby. I was lucky enough to work for the national team in Australia, the Wallabies, and then moved from that, spent 7 years in Japan with Suntory rugby, and then with the Japan national team for 4 years. Moved from that to Fiji rugby, a few Super Rugby teams, which is a Australian, New Zealand, South African domestic comp, quite a few years, and more recently back to the Wallabies again, and most recently back to Suntory, where I started in Japan. So, yeah, run my own company, SpeedPowerPlay. But yeah, long time in the industry, a lot of it in rugby, but a lot of my interests and additional work is outside of rugby. But I guess a fair bit of specialisation in speed and power, and more recently coordination.
Cool. So, like you mentioned, you work a lot with rugby players. So, can you talk to us a little bit about like how should we be programming for athlete with rugby players?
Look, Eric, it depends so much on the country, mate. Because when I was in Japan, the needs to develop the Japanese team was so different. When I was working with Fiji, I was dealing with giants, giant men, and so was a very different program. So I guess, but in any case, everything starts with a needs analysis. Assessing the needs of your team or of that particular individuals within the team. Yeah, when I was working in Japan, we were very, very small. Small rugby team, giving away 11 to 12 kilograms per player across 15 players on the field, which was not sustainable. Not only because you can't win contact, but the fatigue that it causes throughout the game, just running into bigger people. So, the needs in Japan, we had a very big focus on hypertrophy, strength training, and once we'd established that, more specifically speed, agility, and repeat fitness. When I was in Fiji, it was the opposite problem. We had huge men, both tall and very muscular, but their problems were more high rate of injury, high rate of knee problems, hamstring, calf problems, and not particularly strong in terms of repeat fitness. So the needs analysis there was, yielded very different results. So in Fiji, for example, we had a much greater focus on coordination, musculoskeletal health, and a lot of repeat power, repeat fitness. So I think, obviously rugby is pretty complex, because you have very big athletes who need high levels of power and agility, but they also need to sustain that for long periods of time. So I think probably one of the reasons I've stayed in rugby so long is because of the challenge that it does provide. I mean, some of our players are 140 kilos. We're trying to develop agility in those guys. We're trying to develop agility, speed, but also, aerobic capacity or certainly game capacity. So it's a great challenge from that point of view. So all those things are needed, and it really depends. The athletes in front of you will determine the priority of those different areas, I guess. But nonetheless, my philosophy is always a big focus on movement quality. So maximising your potential for agility, speed, and then after that, we look at the capacity to repeat. Think and it doesn't matter. I feel the same way about working with soccer or working with field hockey, or any field-based sport. Is that the fundamental movement skill is running. It's like a water polo team. Yeah, they throw the ball and they score goals and have their tactics via the throwing, but swimming underpins all that. And I think in field sports, we don't have enough emphasis on getting our coaches well educated in how to develop good running athletes. Because if we don't do that, the implications are not only that we don't perform to the level we should, but a very high injury rate, soft tissue injury rate, which is often exists only because of poor mechanics, really. So no matter what country I'm working with or what team I'm working with, I would say 50% or more of my thinking and effort and time goes into developing efficient and fast moving athletes. And so, that's the fundamental skill at the bottom of the pyramid for me that underpins field sports performance. I'm just as happy to work in rugby league, soccer, field sports of any kind, because I think the problem is, fundamentally, for an S&C coach anyway, obviously tactics and technique. So, skill, tactics, and technical models would belong to the head coach. But what we need to do is produce robust running athletes, robust in terms of being able to resist injury, in terms of being able to resist fatigue, and in terms of being able to apply that speed in a multi-directional fashion. So, that's my philosophy in a nutshell, I think.
So, in Japan, from what I've been noticing, Japan is a country that it's hard to accept people or cultural from different countries. So how do you adapt, or how do you find yourself to communicate with Japanese athlete?
Yeah, it's good question. For me, by the time I worked with the Japan national team, I'd already spent 4 or 5 years at Suntory, which is a club team, a good club team in Japan. And so I was very much, I very much enjoyed Japanese lifestyle, Japanese culture, and so that was an easy thing for me to acclimate to. But when I went to the national team, and the head coach who brought me in was Eddie Jones, and when he took over, I think the national squad was something like, I'm going to say, out of, for example, a squad of 40, there was 23 New Zealanders, 2 or 3 English, a couple of Australians, and less than half, or about half, Japanese only. And I think that that wasn't good for a nation trying to embrace a new sport like rugby. They need to see more Japanese players, more Japanese faces. So when Eddie Jones took over, he pretty much kicked out, I think, 90% of the foreign players. So when we started in 2012, he wanted the Japanese public to see a team that was Japanese, essentially. So I think we only had 2 foreign players in that first squad, which was pretty dangerous, to kick out a lot of those really good players. So I was lucky. I worked for a coach that naturally understood, the cultural significance that if we want the country to love this team, we've got to build it from the bottom up. So, for me, so I'll start with the fundamental part of your question is working with Japanese athletes. For me, it was easy because I've never worked with harder working athletes in my life. There's a Japanese word called gaman. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but it basically means, it's hard to translate, but it basically means patience and endurance, that you can tolerate anything. Not something us Australians know much about. We tend to want things quickly and want results fast. The Japanese, this concept of gaman means that they expect a hard journey. And so for me, my training system's pretty hard. I needed guys to get bigger and faster and fitter at the same time. Now, as an SC coach, that's really hard, very hard thing to do. So I had the players training at 5:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m. And I knew that I could do that because they have that mentality of expecting a hard journey, in fact, wanting it really. And so that was a really big, when we sat down and analysed the team and looked for what potential advantages and disadvantages we might have, everyone would always say, oh, you're too small, oh, you're not fast, and all these things. But the one advantage we had is the mindset, is that the Japanese players were prepared to work much harder, much longer hours than, say, a New Zealand team or an Australian team or, a Georgian team, Fijian team. And I've worked with all those countries and I love all those people, but I can just tell you that the Japanese team work much harder and still do. The national team now work very hard. So, and that's really been proven by their rise. I think when I started, we were ranked as low as, 13, 19, right down the bottom there. And now they've gotten as high as 7th in the world. They've beaten world number ones. They've beaten, so they've done all these things. And the cultural advantage there was that expectation of hard work. And I think not expecting. I think a lot of athletes in 2 weeks of hard work and think, oh, why aren't I getting the results? You know, the Japanese will inherently, I think, understand that longer struggle. That was our biggest advantage. So we harnessed that advantage by creating it had to be intelligently designed, of course, but by creating a much tougher training system. So, you know, you're getting up at 5:30 every morning for 5 months in a row. We're in camp. The other thing we had is a little advantage in terms of being together a bit longer than most international teams are. So that's, for me, embracing the Japanese culture was bloody easy because I love the food, I love the lifestyle, I love everything about Japan, and I love the fact that the players were wanting to work hard, you know, and so that was easy. When each year we took a couple more foreign players into the squad, but often they might be a Tongan or Samoan player who'd actually gone to university in Japan. So Eddie pretty much, the head coach, Eddie Jones, pretty much only wanted to bring in players who were already engrossed in Japanese culture. If you've been to university and even high school, some of them in Japan, a lot of the guys you meet there, they might have been born in Tonga, but they've been to high school and university in Japan, and culturally they're quite Japanese. So that wasn't my smart thinking. That was Eddie, the head coach. You know, he really wanted to bring in people who embraced a Japanese way of training and a Japanese style of rugby. And yeah, it's probably a highlight of my career to be involved in something like that because we didn't do it the easy way. We didn't just bring in, you know, get some New Zealanders, pay them money to come to Japan. We actually developed Japanese players and then only brought in foreigners who, you know, would embrace that Japanese style. So it was something special. Yeah, and easy, mate, for me. Really easy because I love being there. I love the people, and you know, it was a big shock to me to leave there and come back to my own country and to not see that same level of dedication and hard work. To be honest.
So since they love the hard work, like
I
like
wouldn't you know, getting, yeah, but you're right. I mean, they expect it and they tolerate it and endure it really well. I don't know any athlete like that I'm talking about. You know, a couple of guys getting put in ambulances after sessions, and I mean, these are crazy things. But generally speaking, for the most part, yeah, they are experiencing high levels of fatigue on a weekly basis. But they would we had a thing where on a Sunday night, each Sunday night, we would have 2 hours together at a little bar on the beach. So we would drink, but only for 2 hours, never to excess. And in that time, everyone would just kind of celebrate how hard the week was and how tough it was. It was something that really brought us together. And I think in Japan, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we live in Taiwan, but I'm not sure what the drinking culture is like. But in Australia and maybe New Zealand and England, getting the guys together and drinking is a dangerous way to celebrate because behaviour can be pretty ordinary at times. And I'll speak for myself and my country in that regard. In Japan, it was safe. You know, we would meet, have some really lovely food at the beach, and have a couple of drinks, and everyone would kind of celebrate that hard work and then get ready to do it again tomorrow. We only did that once a week on average, but for me, it was a very, you know, a really good counterbalance to the high level of hard work during the week. But it doesn't work in all countries and all programs.
so is there like because like in the like traditional like strength training or like performance training, there's gonna be like a deload week every like 3 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks. So since the Japanese athlete like or enjoy the hard work, how do you like plan these deload?
Yeah, it's a good question. We Eddie and I at that time we kept it rather simple. We basically always work on a 3 week cycle. So we just called it week 1 and week 2 or a 1.0 load. And for that we had, you know, an estimated number of minutes of field time, an estimated number of minutes for strength training, speed, conditioning, all the rest of it. On a download week, which was a week 3, we'd go about 70% of the load of the previous 2 weeks. There's several reasons for that. I mean, obviously, you know, it's axiomatic, you know, that you need some form of periodization, but the biggest challenge for us in that time was trying to develop muscle mass while we were working at that high level. Like our field sessions, rugby field sessions were very intense. That's the nature of Eddie's training. So I had to be really careful. So, for example, we had to have carefully positioned sleep windows in mid-morning and lunchtime, because if you're starting at 5:30 every day and you've got a big focus, in 5 months, we're wanting players to increase their lean body mass by between 2 and 5 kilos. Then you have a great need for rest and recovery, and you have a great need for sleep and good nutrition. So it was essential to have those things well managed, and it was essential also to have that download week. So the download week, we would definitely reduce the volume of field time, definitely reduce speed and additional conditioning work, but strength and hypertrophy load were pretty consistent because we needed to sustain gains and improvements in that area.
So the next thing I want to ask is on the SpeedPowerPlay Instagram, you posted some of the training when you're in like Japan. So I noticed that some of the training is like the special like Frans Bosch systems, special strength training or like hip lock. Can you like explain it a little bit to us? Like how does hip lock work and how does the system affect you?
Okay, so I've been a speed coach. I guess I started in track and field, so as long as I've been involved as an SC, I've always had a big focus on speed. But I guess in my background, like most people's background, and when we learn strength and conditioning in our university degrees, or we learn about sprinting, doing resisted sprinting, we understand, that strength training plays a big role, that developing your power is really important. But the missing part of the puzzle for me was movement efficiency. Understanding the role of how force moves through the body, and the role that motor learning and coordination plays in maximizing that. So if we take the example of, if you think of a motor vehicle, you have a motor vehicle that has a V8, a big engine, but the tyres are flat. Okay, so even though it has a big engine, the tyres are flat, it's not going to go really fast. So Frans introduced me, I guess, to a way of thinking that's not just thinking in terms of, maximizing power, or that just running at maximum speed, or doing 6 by 30 meters is better than 3 by 30, or doing a resisted sprint is better than an uphill sprint. It's actually looking at the running in a very technical way, and understanding that if someone's running technique is poor, that they'll actually be wasting a lot of their power through inefficiency. So it's like, again, going back to the car analogy, the wheel alignment might be one wheel's facing straight, one wheel's facing in. The car's not going fast. It doesn't matter how powerful the engine is. And in my second last year with Japan, we actually developed our bodies quite a bit. We've gotten really fit, a little bit bigger. But the game strategy that the head coach, Eddie, developed required a really exceptional level of agility. I didn't feel that I had a big skill set in agility, so I went and approached Frans Bosch, got him to Japan. I ended up getting him for 6 weeks, the first 6 weeks of our World Cup preparation. And that was a massive learning experience for me. So, I guess everyone has, if you're interested in speed, you might have some warm-up drills, high knees, A skips, B skips. You might like certain distances. You might like uphill running. But what Frans teaches is a systematic way to look at someone's movement technique, where the big errors are, and how you can approach rectifying those errors. And that's the big thing. And I had never before, I've been introduced to a lot of good thinkers and a lot of good coaches, but no one who had a systematic approach to developing better linear speed or agility. So, for example, we might start by, normally we just do, you get all your athletes, put them through the timing gates, you work out who's fast and who's not fast, but you don't use that information for anything else. So with Frans, we basically, video all of our athletes. and then make some basic assessments. So, you then work out what are the key errors in the athletes that you've got. And so, for example, a lot of field sport athletes, when they toe off, so when they push on the ground, they've left the ground, the pelvis keeps rotating forward. Okay, so the pelvis keeps rotating forward after toe off, then you've got problems. You've got big problems there. You talk about, can I share screen here, Eric? I can show you some pictures of hip lock stuff if you want.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, you seeing my screen there?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a rugby player. Now this guy's really strong. You can see from his quads, he's a strong guy. He's about 100 kilos. But here he is in mid stance. Okay, so meaning mid stance of the running cycle, and you can see this knee is way lower than this knee, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, and this hip way lower than that hip. So that's complete absence of hip lock. So it means that, and he's a powerful guy. If you do a vertical jump test on him, he's very powerful. His quads are very powerful. He can generate a lot of power. You definitely don't want to run into this guy, I can promise you. But if you're seeing the hip drop like that, you're seeing a lack of block through every stride. He's giving up force every time he hits the ground. Okay, there's no force closure around the hip. Okay, the hip sags each time he's hitting the ground. So it's just like driving a car with flat tires. So he's giving away, what are you going to say, 10, 20, 30% of his energy, because instead of actually, driving, propelling his center of mass forward, actually what's happening is this hip is dropping down. So he's running on flat tires. And that's the performance implication. But more importantly, there's a lot of injury mechanisms that are now coming into place because of this lack of hip lock. You can see you got lateral stress on the knee. You're going to have the calf being longer on the ground, the hamstrings under greater load. So, the lack of hip lock can lead to a whole host of other injury predispositions, as well as just making you slower. So for that, going back to that guy as an example, and he's a very typical example of a quad dominant athlete who hasn't got, pelvic control, hasn't got hip lock demonstrator, either in acceleration or top speed. There's no point getting that guy in the gym and thinking that if he cleans more, he's going to run faster, or if he squats more, he's going to run faster. It's not going to happen because his motor is fine. What's the problem is that his application of force into the ground is compromised. It's compromised through fundamental lack of coordination. And so in his case, the lack of hip lock, that's costing him. It's costing him as an athlete, and it's probably going to hurt him injury-wise somewhere in his career. And I did find that, you ask about, it's always dangerous to make generalizations, but the Japanese athletes are quad dominant athletes. I don't know if you've ever seen Japanese rugby team, but you see some impressive quads. I was always jealous of the guys I worked with that, huge quads. But in terms of strength around the hips, quite poor. So a big focus for us was addressing not only hip lock, but pelvic control and pelvic strength. And Frans likes to say that the pelvis is the launch pad of all good movement, be it agility, acceleration, or top speed. So if you're not controlling your pelvis, it doesn't matter what you squat, what you clean, you're not going to maximize your sprint performance or your agility performance. So in the initial phase, it was that simple for me. It was just understanding that there was a component of strength training that I wasn't addressing. I had developed by that stage fairly good muscularity in the players and developed also pretty good basic leg power. So if I did counter movement jumps, vertical jumps, those scores were coming up quite well. Because when you do a bilateral test, two-legged test, the pelvis is inherently stabilized. When you're doing single-legged stuff, the stress is on the pelvis to control.
So, besides hip lock, is there other elements or other thing you learned from the Frans Bosch system that help you goes along with your career?
There's a lot, Eric. It's impossible for me to summarize it in a short talk like this, but there are many errors, and there are many regions in the body where those errors can occur. So if we look at some of the common ones, if you just video all your field sport athletes, or even some young track athletes, video them from side on, You watch their foot hit the ground, watch the ankle hit the ground, and in most cases, midfoot or toe hits the ground, the ankle keeps collapsing and collapsing and collapsing, often into deep dorsiflexion. So that's a big area of energy loss and such an easy one to fix. In Australia, when I'm coaching athletes, I always talk about you want to be a kangaroo, not a wombat. A kangaroo bounces around on a very springy system. A wombat is just a heavy, fat athlete that has to push and pull. If you don't have ankle stiffness when you run, you're giving up energy every time your foot hits the ground. And in field sport athletes, you're going to see that a lot. Because again, if you think about our traditional strength training programs, we squat, we clean, we snatch, we do single-legged step-ups. None of that is training the ankle in an elastic fashion. Again, it's like if I put my 3 fingers here, I'm tapping on my head as hard as I can. That's just muscular energy, as in muscle contractile energy. If I pull the finger back, bang, that hurt. Then that's elastic energy, and that's what we want to harness. So a lot of Frans's work is positioning the body so you can maximize the use of elastic energy. Because you watch someone like Usain Bolt and you watch the really good sprinters in the world, they're moving in a way that harnesses elastic energy to its maximum degree. And in field sports, I think we've been quite slow in recognising that. And as S&C coaches, and myself included, quite slow in recognising that. We did a really good job with developing concentric power. Some people even got into the isometrics, and that's actually interrelated. But we're pretty slow to come to the understanding of, helping develop coordination for acceleration, agility, and top speed, where the athlete can maximise their own elastic energy. So that was big. That was the big learning for me. And then it was a matter of learning his system, and it's quite complex. And I know it's very intimidating to learn, but I would encourage anyone who has an interest. You can do the course online, and if you have an interest, do it. But understand that it's a significant learning journey. But even if you only understand the basics, that you look at the areas of the body where that energy can be leaking, lack of a frontal plane hip lock, if your ankle's basically, collapsing on every foot strike, then they're really big areas of energy loss. They're flat tires, and you can rectify that pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. The other thing I'd say is that a lot of the times we don't really understand the role of the abdominals and the iliopsoas complex. What is our training for the abdominals? Well, we do a few planks, 2 arms and 2 legs. All you're doing there is isolating the rectus, and it's like doing a bicep curl, thinking you're going to have a better punch. We understand how the abdominals and iliopsoas complex works, and to make them stronger and more capable of accelerating, of flexing, of fast flexion of the swing leg, for example. So through understanding Frans's work, it allowed me to build a new area of exercises and a whole new way of analysing the efficiency of the athlete in front of me. So from that time, if you think about a 1-hour strength training session, and the reality for me is that in rugby, it's still a collision sport. We need to be a certain size and weight to play it. But if I had a 60-minute session, there might be 20 minutes of upper work, 20 minutes of lower work, and there'd be 20 minutes of coordination. And so I would have, if I had 20 athletes in the gym, 7 would be doing simple upper work, 7 might be doing simple lower work, and I would be looking after the 7 doing the more complex coordination work that I learned from Frans. And that paid me back, addressing that and understanding that, and more importantly, putting time into it. And then when it came to field training, using a whole, different set of field drills as well. It's difficult to give you a complete sort of summary of it all, because it is a big body of thing to learn, really. But in a nutshell, you are learning a system to maximize movement efficiency, rather than just thinking that you're going to solve every puzzle by improving power or improving strength, because they have limits. I can show you a lot of really strong, powerful athletes who are just giving up. They're leaking energy at the ankle. They're leaking energy at the hip. Their trunk and iliopsoas complex are not nearly strong enough to accelerate the big, heavy thighs that they've got. So All of that stuff became quite clear when I learned Frans' system, and I'm still learning it. You know, how long ago is that now? It's nearly 10 years ago. I'm still refining and trying to refine how I use it, and the amount to which I use it depends on the athletes in front of me. You know, how poor their movement efficiency is. I must say though that I have got one or two athletes who have got fantastic movement efficiency, fantastic elastic qualities. And some of those athletes I do gravitate back toward more traditional strength and power methods because they actually are very efficient in their movement and they may well do better in a sport, particularly a collision sport, by actually just being a bit stronger and perhaps a bit more muscular. So, you know, very much depends on the situation. But before I learned from Frans, I didn't have a systematic approach. Didn't have any way I could approach those problems systematically. I would just guess. I might find a few new exercises. I might find a couple of agility drills from a good coach, but I couldn't really explain to you how they fit together systematically.
So after like working in Japan and now you have like your own company called SpeedPowerPlay, right?
Yeah.
So on our previous conversation, we talked about like it's basically helping athletes run faster with like greater agility and movement quality, right?
Yep. That's pretty fair. Yep.
So can you like introduce to us like what is the training system or like what is the training training system looks like for the SpeedPowerPlay?
So I guess through SpeedPowerPlay, I have myself and a couple of other colleagues who work more in soccer or football, whichever you like to call it. But basically, we're trying to provide good quality training content and good quality training systems for field sport athletes. Because again, I go back to, if you had been a swimmer when you were young, or if you played water polo, you're going to do a lot of work on stroke correction, stroke refinement, because they understand the underlying skill is swimming. So, yeah, we're trying to provide a little bit of a systematic way to develop your movement skills. So, yeah, okay, so I'll give you a summary. So there's certain categories. So we, have general power, strength, and morphology. Category 2 is mobility activation. Category 3 is what I call prefabs. Category 4, simple patterns. Category 5, complex patterns. And category 6 is complex contextual patterns. Now, that's a lot of words there. So we'll start at the beginning. General strength, power, and morphology. I mean, it doesn't matter what sport you play. I'm not telling you that you don't need to do strength training, you don't need to do flexibility. If you lack fundamental strength, if you can't do a single-legged squat, if your hip flexors are excessively tight, those morphological basic strength problems are going to they're going to limit your performance in field sport, whether it be soccer, rugby, or whatever. So we address those basic developmental things. That means more efficient flexibility routines, more sport-specific power development, sport-specific strength development, and including trunk strength development. We then look at, a lot of athletes have very poor mobility and activation protocols before they do their field sessions. Because basically I love the gym and I love S&C, but for field sports athletes, your field sessions are your church. That's where the really important stuff happens. So, we teach better mobility and activation procedures pre-training. And then we get into the more complex aspect of breaking down your technique and how to improve it. And this is very heavily influenced, again, by what I've learned from Frans. And so if we start with prefabs, okay? So let's say I watched you run and I've assessed certain errors in your running. So if we look at acceleration, I'm watching you run over 10 meters and you had really poor ankle stiffness, okay? And your trunk was not rigid, it was floppy and weak. So a prefab means, you don't call it a prefab or a building block, is a part of the body or a region of the body, some exercises that we can develop, go away, we can develop them in the gym or we can do them on the field. So, for example, we need to develop better ankle stiffness. So I'm going to give you some exercises where you're forward flex, you've got your feet split and maybe a bar on your back, and you're just going to bang, 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 switch your feet. and you're not going to let the heel get anywhere near the ground. So they're prefabs. They're small exercises that are targeting specific parts of the running cycle or specific parts of the agility program. So in those prefabs, we teach you those prefabs, and they'll, we use a product called VueMotion, which is a new running analysis system. So I will kind of put an athlete through that and then identify which prefabs they need. Let's say, again, we said your trunk stiffness was pretty poor. You were forward flexed and quite weak in acceleration. So we're going to get you up against the wall and do some lockout exercises and stress the trunk in different ways to improve the stiffness of your trunk, for that acceleration. So they're prefabs where you break down the running gait into little areas of regional specificity. And again, we call it prefab because it's like, in Australia, we have a lot of mining. And in these mining, they might mine one area and they bring in the buildings, they put the walls up. So that's prefab walls, prefab roofs, prefab windows. And then when they go to the next mine site, they take down those prefabs, put them over here. So in running, prefab is an adjustable small component of a bigger system. Hope that makes sense. So when you're accelerating, ankle stiffness is a prefab. And we can train that in the gym. We can train that really well in the gym. And that's what I do. Is if you're doing an hour in the gym, you're going to do 15 to 20 minutes of prefabs. And ideally, those prefabs will be chosen based on an analysis that we've done on you. And that doesn't have to be that complex, Next thing we go to is simple patterns. So simple pattern, say if you're a soccer player, simple pattern might simply just be 5 meter out and back. So I call it a turn and burn, but simple acceleration, deceleration patterns. Or it might be a lockout where we start in a crouch position and we're accelerating bang into the wall, into a flex position on the wall. So it's a little more, it's a bigger chunk of movement. It's actually a whole movement pattern, but it's simple. It's not sport specific. There's no ball involved. There's no visual reaction. We start training those simple patterns. And so that now, again, that might be, if it's soccer, you might come from a track background and you might be a good runner, but you're really poor at decelerating. So when you got to decelerate in front of a player who's got the ball, you've got bad coordination. So then we might work on simple patterns around deceleration and hinging. Hinging means forward flexing at the hip. So we have prefabs, we have simple patterns, then we go to complex patterns. We're adding more complexity to those patterns. And after that, there's complex contextual. That's really the job of the coach. So that's where the coach takes over, and if it's soccer or football, that's your 5v5 small-sided games or full field games. But we have that kind of systematic way of approaching. We're not just saying to you, go and do this strength program and you'll run faster. We're actually breaking it down into that systematic approach. So my mission this year is to develop the apps in that fashion. I mean, our first apps, all I did is threw a whole lot of trunk and core exercises and a whole lot of hip and pelvic control, and I just graded it from white belt through to black belt. And the reason I did that is because I knew that a lot of people struggle to understand the system, but I also know that I come from a martial arts background and I love martial arts. And when you're a martial arts person, you don't want to be a white belt. You want to get to the yellow, you want to get to blue, you want to get to red and black. And when I created that system, most athletes in the gym, they're motivated maybe to improve their bench press, but they weren't motivated on our functional strength exercises. So I just graded it that way, gave it to my athletes, and they were all trying to get themselves to the harder exercises. And so there's a mix in there really on our first apps. Some of it's hip lock, some of it's just basic pelvic control, some of it's more mobility. But I guarantee you that even on the old app, if people move from level 1 to level 5 or from white belt through to black belt, they're going to be a hell of a lot better. Because before I even understood Frans' system, I learned, I don't know if you ever heard of a system called the pose running system by a Russian guy, Romanov. It's like 20, 30 years old. And I didn't particularly agree with what he was promoting in terms of his running gait, but he had fantastic body weight, strength, functional exercises developed for runners. And there was probably about 50 exercises maybe. So I looked at all those and I just graded them from level 1 to level 5. I gave them to my rugby players and they weren't specific. They weren't like Frans. It wasn't a specific hip lock. But they were very good exercises, all single leg, all combining leg strength, hip strength, trunk strength. And I noticed that I had improvements in running gait, even just with that really crude system. So, yeah, I did in our first apps, I did the same thing with Frans exercises and quite a lot of my own that don't come from Frans, that came from either this Romanov pose system or from things I'd learned from Vern Gambetta and people like that. But if we're going to get development in functional strength, and I don't like using the term functional strength, but we use it and people are familiar with it. So if you want to motivate athletes to get better and that, you've got to sell it really well. And that's why I developed the grading system. So yeah, a new app coming out this year. I'm working hard on that. We're trying to just be more specific. So we're actually saying here is 5 levels of prefabs for ankle stiffness. If you've been told you've got poor ankle stiffness, here's 5 levels of prefabs for high intensity hip lock, to be a bit more specific about it. And also a lot of content that's nothing to do with Bosch systems really. That's a lot of conditioning games that I've used over the years. If you're a power athlete or you're a martial artist, here's some medicine ball conditioning games. So we're really trying to represent easy to use resources, because it's hard. I found for me as a strength conditioning coach and even as a really old one, there's a lot of content out there and it's a big investment in time to get to learn some of them. So I like to give people products that are easy to use, that at least get you a start. You can get a start on this topic, because I think once you've played with those exercises for a little while, then improving your theory and getting a deeper understanding is much more possible. If you just start with the theory alone and you don't have any little library of exercises to use, it's pretty hard. And I've been really lucky to have good access to people like Frans and Vern Gambetta, but a lot of athletes don't have access to them. So with SpeedPowerPlay, we try and make the complex simple. That's my mission really, is to look at all these complex systems and create some simple resources. But I'm not trying to replace the fact that if you want a deeper understanding of these things, if you really want to understand, for example, coordination and Frans' system, or you might have a different mentor that approaches it a different way, you need to expect and understand that's going to be a big undertaking. But yeah, through SpeedPowerPlay, we want to put tools in your pocket straight away that you can use. Hopefully that'll stimulate you to have a bigger library of things to draw on in coaching. Hopefully you'll go away and do that extra work, go and do Frans' course, or learn through Altus, learn through other people providing stuff. Because it's not about being lazy, it's about having a few more tools, and having more tools, that's a great stimulant to learning more and more.
So I've downloaded your app and really love it. And at the beginning, I was curious about like, what is the belt? So like, you just explain it, how the belts, how you like divided the grade come from. Love that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because it's just for me. I mean, the only things all my life, the only things I love is fighting and running. And I was always obsessed as a kid. I was always obsessed. Bruce Lee, Muhammad Ali, and for running, I knew all the best runners over 100 meters, best runners over 10K. And so when I was running, it's always simple. You just want to run faster. When I started martial arts, it was a motivation, obviously to beat someone in sparring if you're sparring, but motivation to improve your grading. And that to me was, maybe I just assume that everyone understands martial arts and understands what a white belt, yellow belt. Maybe I need to rename that, just go back to level 1 to level 5. But that's the reason for it.
No worries, man. People love it. So when will the new app be coming out?
So we're developing it in a modular system, meaning that, so for example, we'll be putting out medicine ball conditioning games. That'll be coming out probably March. Then after that, we start developing. We're just going to drop them out through the year, and I think the one after that will be just like knee rehab. So we'll just drop them out one by one. We have a lot of them developed, but some of them are not going to the App Store. But we have a club consulting business as well. So for example, we consult with a couple of big clubs, and those clubs get us to video all their players, and we analyse that, and then we actually, that's an app that goes direct to the club, and they can access that content. That's not free. That's not available to the public. But yeah, pretty much we're expecting from March to put probably 2 or 3 more modules out. And anyone who's bought the Hip or Core ones previously and they've expired, I'll renew all those. They can get those renewed free. We're just trying to work out the mechanics of how we do that. Yes, from March we'll start dropping out. I think the conditioning ones will come first, and then the specific ones around acceleration and agility will be coming thereafter. But at the moment, that timeline should be pretty accurate, as long as I don't take another busy job. I'm working at Suntory in Japan at the moment, but I'm only there 20 weeks a year, so I've got other time to keep developing the SPP content. But as you know, in this industry, mate, we get sacked and we get new jobs and things change. So I hope I can keep to those timelines, or maybe even a little bit better.
Cool, man. Let me know when everything got posted, okay?
Yeah, well, we've got I can, you and I can talk offline. We've got a developmental app which is not released to the public, but we let a few people play with it and give us feedback on it, and let you have a play with that and give us some feedback.
Cool. So that's like kind of all the questions I have for today. So if there's like coaches and therapists are interested in what we are talking about today, where can they reach out to you? And if they are interested in the SpeedPowerPlay app, where can they find it?
Yeah, well, I'm an old guy, so I'm pretty poor on social media. I haven't posted much for a long time. I've committed myself to doing more this year. So we're on Twitter at SpeedPowerPlay. My personal Twitter is at Fit3K, FIT3K. I don't do much through that. So we'll be doing more through at SpeedPowerPlay. Also, our website is speedpowerplay.com. We've got a YouTube channel there with some free stuff on there, and we'll make a bit more stuff available. And yeah, you can contact us through any of those. I've always struggled, I think, with social media. I'd like to do more, but I find that I can't really convey great wisdom to you in 20 words or 100 words. I used to post a lot of videos, but I used to post a lot of videos without much explanation. And what I found was that it was exciting for people. They could watch all these interesting exercises, but I was probably confusing more people than I was helping. So this year I'm going to try and provide, shorter clips and a bit more explanation of what's going on. So if I haven't done that in 4 weeks, mate, you can bring me up and abuse me. I'll, try and commit to that. But yeah, I think you younger guys are much more efficient and adept at social media than my generation. But yeah, you can get us at SpeedPowerPlay, and I think we have an Instagram account. I'll let the young guys look after that. I think either of those avenues is fine.
Looking forward to that, man. Looking forward.
No worries. I appreciate being invited and the opportunity to speak to you.
Appreciate it for your time, man. Appreciate it.